All right, welcome, friends, colleagues, students, citizens of the world. This is LeRoy Horton, host of your Teach Me Implants platform. And I am so excited today because I have got literally, and I've called this episode the godfather of implants. Because not only do we have someone with a profound, prolific history, with a catalog of patents and designs and contributions to the implant world. But in true Godfather fashion, this man, despite being a handsome, good looking 82-year-old, still walks around with the energy, the passion, the drive, and the argumentativeness of a young man. So, without further ado, I would love to introduce to the audience one of the pioneers of implant dentistry, Dr. Gerald Niznick. How's it going, brother?
Great, great. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you. I've been actually an admirer of yours
Oh,
and followed you for quite a while. You've got a rising career for sure and a great future ahead of you.
hey, I appreciate you, man. And I wanted to give some of the listeners a preamble to my introduction to you. And you've been a part of my life, whether you've known it or not, for a really long time, directly and indirectly. So I grew up on Zimmer implants. Our implantology course was taught by a prosthodontist named Keith Phillips up here in Washington. And Zimmer was the sponsor at the University of Washington at the time for the oral implantology course. I like a lot of people that use Zimmer for a while. When you left Zimmer and eventually started Implant Direct, a lot of us migrated with you, right? So I was a part of that journey with you as well. And I have this distinct memory. It had to be 2009 or 2010. I think it was the one of the AAID conferences. And this guy's on the stage and he's talking for a full hour about platform shifting, right? And then you were the very next presenter. And literally, the first thing out of your mouth was, "Good morning. I want you to know that everything you just heard is complete bullshit." And you said that in front of 2,000 dentists, and it was an uproar. Some people laughing, some people chuckling. And that's when my business partner, who I was with, he said, "Hey, if you don't know Jerry Niznick, this is Jerry Niznick." And you put together an hour of your time on the stage, dismantling this poor guy who had the unfortunate luck of going before you. And then you flash forward, what, 20 years almost, and we're at the ICOI this year. And who goes before you? Yours truly, right? And in my head, I was like, all right, I know he's prone to some bombastic wordings, but I did have the pleasure of making your lecture because you did reference some of our discussions and debate, but you did it in a way that was kind. And then we shook hands and took pictures afterwards. So I appreciate that. But literally, bro, you have been a part of my life professionally way before we met and started talking for a very long time. So I wanted to thank you for that. I wanted to open up the discussion by, giving you your props and your accolades. You've definitely been an inspiration and a pioneer in this game.
Let me just correct one thing historically.
Okay.
Um, Zimmer, um, before there was Zimmer Dental, there was Calcitech.
Mm,
And Calcitech in the year 2000 bought Corvent, which I was
okay.
then calling Paragon. But and they quickly morphed into Centropulse and then Zimmer Dental and ZimV today. So
Mm,
ZimV is still selling the tapered screw vent that I developed in 1999 and a few other implants that I developed along the line are within the Zimmer line. So Zimmer is still selling my products. I started Implant Direct in 2004, sold it in 2013. Most of the implants they're using today are ones that I developed. So I live on in different companies and I keep regenerating myself every 10 or
yes.
15 years.
Clearly, clearly. But that leads me to one of my questions with you, man. And you're obviously very passionate about this, and I get questions all the time myself about what my retirement dream looks like, right? And here you are, very spry, still in your 80s, more successful than most people on the planet, let alone dentists. So many people would say, why aren't you on the beach somewhere sipping Mai Tais, right? But my question is a little bit more nuanced because I understand your passion because I have that same passion as well. So why retire when you love this stuff, right? But my question for you is, after all these years, are you driven by the desire to create the perfect implant, or is it more a primal need to stay dominant in this space of ours in the industry? What would you say is your motivating force for still going?
I think it's just the stupidity that's out there. Right, irritates the hell out of me. And what's happened in the implant industry is a company comes up with a design, a Straumann or a Nobel, and they make it popular. Then you've got all these clones, 25 companies from Israel, Brazil, Korea. Well, they think I'm just going to copy that, and I'll sell it for less and make some money. And so all the implants gravitate to the wrong, what I believe is the wrong direction. And I just felt I had to come back and do a reset.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, speaking of implant copies, right? There's copies of copies of copies
You're
out
right.
there now, right? But you have a facility in California that I had the pleasure of visiting years ago. I don't know if it's still called the Zimmer Institute, but it was in Carlsbad. There was an implant factory. That's a part of your legacy, right?
No, no, that was Calcitech
Mm,
and Zimmer Dental in Carlsbad. You're talking about.
right, right,
I have
right.
a factory that I built in 2000 in 1994 in Calabasas, California. Zimmer Dental operated there, Implant Direct operated there. I didn't renew after I left Implant Direct, I didn't renew the lease with them. They had to move somewhere else, and I kept this building empty for 8 years, thinking I might come back.
Right.
And it was built just for implants, and we've got 30 some machines. 45 of Implant Direct's employees came back to work for me when I started my new Paragon company. So I had an entire brain transfer. I
Okay.
treat people, my employees, like family, and they all knew they had a secure position with me. So we started all over again, new implants, new manufacturing, new equipment, and we think about 8 days away from launch. We think
Oh,
that the FDA will be completed with the FDA by the end of this month, and we'll launch some of the new products that I've got.
okay. And so this is you've kind of regenerated, to use your word, the Paragon company of implants that you originally had started with.
I use that name again, Paragon, but everything's new. I've got four new patents, one issued and three that are pending. So the products have new features on it. I've been influenced a great deal by Dr. Boozer from Straumann. He's the KOL for Straumann, but he's a strong believer in a hybrid design, a smooth neck. I didn't agree with them to begin with because the Implant Direct implants were chasing Astra with the micro threads and the blast to the top. But after I understood what he was trying to say, I realized the potential of an implant with a longer smooth neck for giving you vertical flexibility when you're placing the implant. We think
Right.
so much about width, or length of the implant, but I think the controlling factor is vertical flexibility. The bridges are often uneven. You're doing immediate extractions, and you got to do a lot of bone grafting, or you've got a ton of abutment heights which would be nice to avoid, and I think I've accomplished that. So to simplify things, so reducing the number of platforms, reducing the number of abutment heights, and letting the implant be your workhorse in adjusting the vertical positioning of the implant is dramatically going to simplify it, and it's going to reduce the incidence of peri-implantitis, which is a more important or a more concerning factor today than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago when I developed my earlier implants. So I've evolved with the industry basically.
And I can see where that has value. I mean, the more data we have now, we know that, peri-implant mucositis is hovering around 40+%, peri-implantitis, depending on how it's defined, anywhere from 15 to 20% of people's implants. So it's definitely, our strategies from the surgical side and the prosthetic side, and you're a prosthodontist, so you could definitely attest to the prosthetic side of things. But obviously the company's catching up to designs that can be adaptive and versatile, right? Which
My company is.
your
I wouldn't say the others are. I mean, you take a look at Straumann, their bone level implants are all blasted to the top. And Boozer, who only uses their tissue level implant, which has a 2.8 millimeter smooth neck, he only uses that one implant, and then not even the one that flares out, just the one that goes straight, because he then pushes part of the smooth neck subcrestal, which accomplishes a supracrestal junction. Get that junction up a millimeter above the bone. It gives you a smooth neck below the bone because often the ridge is tapered or flared, and you're going to expose a millimeter on the labial anyways, or the bone will remodel. So once I understood why he was using their tissue level implant as a bone level implant, the lights went on, and I said, hey, I can do that better. So I created a 2.5 millimeter neck with score lines, and a number of other things. Another step beyond that was I call it the implant, the Gen 5, but I made the Gen 5 Plus. And what that is the same implant, but a 2 millimeter friction fit extender on that implant that comes delivered with the implant. We force it together, and you can't separate it unless you use a retrieval tool. But that flares out to a standard multi-unit abutment, 4.8 millimeters. So now all you got to do is the prosthetic screw that goes on top can be different heights. And if you can adjust the position of the implant. You got this 2 millimeter extension. You got screws at different heights. So now your inventory are $25 screws, not $150, $250 abutments.
Yes,
And you
yes.
can, the surgical protocol is still evolving too. Let me explain this because I think this is really interesting. We're going to advocate that when you prepare the site, you go to the full depth you want. Say the implant is 14 millimeters. I added a millimeter to every implant to give you an extra millimeter. So instead of 13, it's 14. You penetrate 14 millimeters in, say on a full arch case where it's flapped. You then screw the implant in 12 millimeters, suture your tissue, and then decide how much more you want to sink the implant based on the tissue.
I like that.
How's that for
I like
thinking
that. That
out of
is
the
innovative.
box?
Yes, that is innovative. I like that. Because that's one thing that if you're doing like a tissue punch or transmucosal placement of implant, you can more easily gauge where your soft tissue is. But when you are in those situations where you have these large flaps, right? You're guesstimating, and then sometimes when you go to close the tissue, you're short, you're
Right.
almost burying it with your tissue. So I really like that idea of being able to decide after you replace your tissue at what level you place your implant. But speaking
I'm
of
not
that,
big on tissue punches because it takes away the attached tissue.
right,
So Our drills will come with drill stops. So you'll be able to go through a surgical guide, bump into the bone, and stop the drill, screw the implant partially in, leave a couple millimeters up, do what I said, suture, and now do your final adjustments after the tissues are sutured to where you want to. So now you're controlling the level without buying a bunch of different heights of abutments.
I like that. I like that. Let me share my screen with you here, if I may, um, because I really want to get into, the platform that I'm trying to drive here is a bit more academic, and so let me know if you're able to see this slideshow.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to put my glasses on just to be sure. Yeah, I see better without them. I just had cataracts, so I can see pretty good.
Awesome. So one of the things that we know, and this is kind of a preamble to what we're going to get into specifically with your Paragon implant, is that when it comes to implant placement, it's not just what implant are you placing, right? We wish it was
Yeah.
that simple. Like, hey, I choose the magic implant and boom, all my problems are solved. There's a myriad of studies, and I just grabbed a handful for just even just a short list of some of the things we look at when we assess our patients comprehensively. So when we look at soft tissue quality, right? Thickness of soft tissue, amount of keratinized tissue, amount of attached tissue. What are your antibiotic, prophylactic or post-operative protocols going to be? There's data on that. What are your systemic risk factors, right? Smoking, diabetes, patients that have autoimmune disorders and so forth. There's growth and development, right? Where a lot of us now are trying to put implants later. If we can kick the can down the road and not put implants in the 20-year-old, it's preferred, right? Position of the implant, whether it's in an effort to ensure we have papilla or preserve papilla, our restorative position of the implant, vertically, mesiodistally, buccolingually, and so forth. And of course, here at the bottom, prosthetic design, right? So the design of your implant, whether it's, like you said, blasted to the top, or you got a soft tissue collar or a polished collar, your implant connection type. So if anyone is listening to this and you were of the ilk that thought that the implant would make you a great surgeon from one day to the next simply by choosing the implant, I hope that we can agree that it takes more to be a good practitioner, whether you're on the surgical side or the restorative side, right? Which brings us to your implant, the Paragon implant. And I figured before we get into issues of potential disagreement, I really wanted to highlight what I love about this implant. Okay, without being too salesy, because I don't want anyone to think that I'm on your payroll or anything, right? But
Not yet.
knowing that we were
Not yet.
not yet, well, I knowing that we might have a discussion, I kind of did a deep dive, and I wanted to see, all right, this man, Dr. Niznick, I see him championing his products, his ideas in comparison to others. And I wanted to see how this would fit in my ideology and practice philosophy. So I love that you have the smooth collar because yes, we are more and more aware that we have to anticipate bone remodeling, and we want to make sure that when it does remodel, there's a favorable surface for the soft tissue to connect to as robustly as possible. And we know that a rough surface is going to catch plaque and promote inflammation. A smooth surface, you're going to get that soft tissue attachment that's going to be a lot more firm. So I love that. I love the anodized gold and pink. So in areas where you might have a thin biotype, gold and pink do very good on our aesthetic scores, right?
And that's for color coding also.
Oh
So the
yeah,
only two colors that you can do that are acceptable are gold and pink. So
right.
all of the abutments that fit the wider ones are pink, and the smaller ones are gold. Down to two platforms from four, but I will never go to one platform. I think that's uh,
A little too simplified there. Yeah. I love that you got gauges on your smooth collar, because if you've done implants for any amount of time, whether we're talking about hash marks that you're trying to keep an eye on when there's a bloody and saline is pouring on your drill and you're trying to remember, is that the second line or the third line? Or when you're trying to insert your implant, having fixed gauges, I think makes life a lot simpler, right? And if we can make the job of the surgeon easier, that means we're going to improve our accuracy and improve our incomes. I love that you have the various.
Let me tell you a funny story about those
Yeah.
grooves.
Okay.
Dr. Michael Norton, who's the past president of Academy of Osseointegration, just spoke in Seattle a couple of weeks ago, gave the keynote speech on controversies in implants. And I had been beating him up because all he did was Astra. And he said that he's questioning his confirmation bias. Can all of these implants that are blasted at the top be wrong? Can this one be the right one? And he showed mine. And he referred to the grooves. And we know that the bone will run down a smooth surface a little more than it will on a blasted surface. You might lose a quarter of a millimeter more of bone. But he said those grooves might act like the first thread on an implant and stop the bone loss. So he wants to call it the Norton notch. So that's the Norton notch you're looking at.
The
And it
Norton
may be,
notch.
it'd be an interesting animal study to see if it does it, but I'm not so concerned about a quarter millimeter of bone loss as I am about complications down the road from peri-implantitis.
Absolutely,
Go ahead.
absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I think that having this friction fit extender is great because it gives you the versatility of raising the abutment crown connection. You know, making sure that if there's any micro gaps, they're far away from where the bone is, right? And the fact that this is a Morse type fit, it means that the micro gap between the friction fit and your actual implant is null to absent, right? Because it's cold welding against each other. Am I correct in that?
Yes, Coldwell. There's a difference between a Morris. A Morris taper is 1 to 1.5 degrees. When you hear of Neodent calling the 14 degrees the Grand Morris, it's ridiculous. It's Morris Leibovich, maybe, not Morris the engineer. Uh, but what I did and what I developed in 94 was an interference fit. I take the male hex tapered 1 degree, seat it in so it won't fully seat, and then we got to apply 30, 40 pounds of pressure to drive the two parts together. The only way you can get them apart is with a retrieval tool, so it has internal threads. So basically, it's a one-piece implant with the ability to take off the top. It's like Nobel's on one, except they sell it to you separately and you have to attach it. This is giving you that extension. And let's say you're in an aesthetic situation and the tissue recedes. You've used this implant. You could take off the top and then connect just to the implant below it and drop your whole margin 2 millimeters to accommodate for resorbed tissue recession. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So, and that's these are all great points. I actually I like that. And I have a slide that's going to ask you a question in regards to the connect there. And then I love your surface, right? And I think one of the in the previous slide, for anyone that's listening and has not seen watching this on YouTube, I cited a study. It was a dog study using Paragon implants where they showed that your particular surface at 90 days had the highest bone to implant contact, histologically, right? So there's a lot positive about this implant that I do like. And this is where I guess our disagreements in the last maybe 4 or 5 months or so
Yes.
have kind of centered around the very, I guess, there's the zero bone loss concept that's out there from Tomas Linkovicius. And now, mind you, I'm not a big fan of the name because the name's it's a marketing shtick, right? You never have zero bone loss. But I wanted to highlight that I feel like some of our disagreements is really just semantics, that we are in agreement, right? There's going to be bone remodeling. thicker tissue is better than thinner tissue. And being able to account for the tissue types and the irregularities in the bone is a prudent way to plan your implant, whether you're planning it from your surgical strategy or you're using a versatile implant, potentially like Paragon implant, right?
Eh,
And so, oh, go ahead.
that was
Right. So, what is the difference? Because as I look at your literature, it looks like you are placing the sandblasted surface, the rough surface, subcrestal. You're anticipating remodeling in your protocols and your philosophy with this implant and its design. How is that different from, say, strategically placing a bone level implant a millimeter or so subcrestal to ensure that it's 3 millimeters from the emergence when it's all said and done?
well, one is assuring that you're going to get the bone loss, and the other is accommodating for it in case it happens. Uh,
Gotcha.
um, and I use your slides in my lectures, matter of fact. They're very
Yeah,
good at demonstrating what you're doing here. You're dropping the implant down if the tissue is thinner so that you always keep 3 millimeters of tissue above the top of the implant. Well, that's
right,
just guaranteeing that you've already lost the bone contact. When your implant's subcrestal, you've given up a millimeter or two of bone support, and that
right,
bone will run down below the implant abutment junction. You're never going to get osseointegration above that junction. So all you're doing is assuring that you're going to lose bone down to that level. Why not have the implant sticking a millimeter above where the connection is easier to accommodate, and then design the implant to accommodate bone loss if it occurs, rather than assuring that it's going to occur.
right, right. Which totally makes sense. I do have a question. In your guys' study in the lead up to the launch of this, where do you see the bone typically ended up? Is it usually ending up at that junction of smooth to rough surface, or are you
No,
seeing
no.
retention of bone above the rough surface?
You and there was just a study put out by Straumann trying to show that they were better than the Nobel Active, because the Nobel Active's got a 2 millimeter smooth neck. So they took their implant with the rough surface and the Nobel with the smooth, and there was a quarter of a millimeter of difference of bone loss. So you're not going to automatically lose bone down to the junction. As a matter of fact, if you've got 2 millimeters of bone labial plate thickness, you probably won't lose any bone or a measurable amount. I proved this in the 90s. I funded the VA study, over $4 million, 900 patients, 2,700 implants done in 32 VA centers. And the protocol was we did test a variety of different implants that I had, the core vent, HA-coated microvent, screw vent. But every time they drilled a hole, they would measure the labial plate, then put in the implant, then suture, and come back in 3 months. When they came back, they could correlate bone loss with how thick the labial plate was at the start. And if they had 2 millimeters of labial plate, they weren't losing any bone on a smooth acid etch surface or rough HA surface. But when you start getting down to a millimeter or half a millimeter, you're going to lose a millimeter or 2 millimeters of bone. So design an implant that can accommodate for the bone, because one, you don't know how thick the tissue is going to be till you get in there. You don't know how thin the labial plate's going to be till you get in there. You can modify the both the thickness of the tissue and the labial plate if you want, but just design an implant that accommodates for it, and you don't need to worry about it. Now you get that junction. When you have a subcrestal placement, you need to cut away bone just to seat the flared abutment or healing collar. So you turn a two-stage into a three-stage surgery. And then if you're going to have micro leakage, you sure as hell don't want it below the bone. You're better off having it above the bone. And one other thing is we've gone away from cemented restorations to screw retained. Would you agree that that's most
Absolutely.
of what you do?
Whenever possible. Yes, sir. Yeah, vast
Hard
majority.
cement every opportunity I have for a single tooth.
Really?
Absolutely. I got one right here. My wife's got a
Okay.
couple. What the problem with cemented is cleaning the cement off.
Yeah.
So if you get that junction up a millimeter or so above the bone, and then you make your abutment with its margin so it's a little higher on the lingual than the tissue and just a half millimeter below the tissue on the labial. Very easy to clean the cement off, and a cemented. I don't have holes going through it. I don't have to worry about the trajectory of the screw. And why do I need retrievability? We don't have retrievability at crown and bridge. You cut off the crown and redo it again if you need it. So I'm talking about coming back to the industry to create a paradigm shift in thinking away from the subgingival, away from everything has to be screw retained. I know I'm for full arch screw retained 100%, but when you're talking about a single tooth, you have a problem with screw retained because if the path of insertion of that crown as it gets between the contacts doesn't match the path of insertion of the screw, you're not going to get that screw retained abutment properly seated. I don't know if you thought about that, but you screw it in, but it's hanging up this way.
Right.
And I show in my lecture a number of screw retained single teeth abutments that never got fully seated. Um,
Well,
so
let me ask you this because I'm I'm more of a relativist, right? So for me, if
more of a
anyone
what?
says a relativist,
What
right?
does that mean?
It means I try to shy away from absolutes, right? So I do screw retained where screw retained mechanically works and is feasible. Where it might be better to do cement retained, I'll do cement retained,
Good.
right? And you're saying a paradigm shift to get away from screw retained altogether, or do
No,
you still
no,
see
no, no.
value in being able to
I
pick and
love
choose?
screw retain. I'm talking about a single or maybe a 3 unit bridge cemented. Beyond that, it should be screw retained.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now that does beg a question, right? Because if Gerald Niznick is doing an implant, if Dennis Tarnow is doing an implant, and Stephen Chu and all them, yes, I trust that there's going to be that level of expertise for decision making that fits the scenario. When you're creating an implant or proposing a philosophy, how much do you account for the general dental public that's going to be using your implant surgically and restoratively, knowing that there's going to be just a big proportion of them that are not the best at making decisions?
100%. You got to make it for the lowest common denominator. I remember in 82 or 83, an oral surgeon showed me a case where he put the core vent into the mandibular canal, and he showed it me, and I said, "Look, if you use the magnified schematic that I make, it's magnified 25% to select the length, this won't happen." I said, "I tried to make this thing idiot proof, but apparently I didn't make it oral surgeon proof." So the smooth neck, the supercrestal, the color coding, the minimum number of components, that's all directed at making it as easy and as profitable as possible.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, in that same vein of questioning, a couple years back, I don't know if you remember, but Craig Mish came out with an op-ed basically saying that implants should be just for specialists, right? And I remember my business partner who actually he's in his 70s, a little older than me, actually used to practice not too far from you in California. And he recounts a time where everyone thought you were crazy for getting into implants, not being an oral surgeon, because at the time it was predominantly the OS guys that were doing implants. And Craig Mish comes out a couple years ago and makes it seem like in his op-ed, he said that the general dentist should only be going as far as maybe extraction and ridge preservation, but nothing more. Where do you stand on that, given that obviously you're trying to sell to as many people as possible? Who should not be doing implants or using your implant in your
I
opinion?
am credited with coining the expression, "You've been overloaded with misinformation."
That's I like that.
But I was going back to his brother more than him. I think Craig is a brilliant guy. Um, uh, Listen, every time you take out a tooth, there's a hole.
Mhm.
Put an implant in. You
Right,
know, I mean, that's every GP. It's not. We're not going to stop this because it's
right,
profitable. So every GP, you drive up and down the street, and every dentist says advertise for implants. Our job is to elevate their awareness and their education as to what not to do, what cases they're not capable of doing, using an implant that's going to minimize the risk of fractures, of peri-implantitis. I've seen some people put implants 3 millimeters subcrestal, and then try and connect an abutment into that tunnel.
right.
So it's education, and I am launching a 28 city lecture tour by the end of this year. I will
Okay.
visit 28 cities, not coming to Seattle too far
Uh,
north,
no.
but got a bunch of cities, and we're running a training program every other month in Los Angeles. So it's a matter of educating, but my goodness, if you can do a 3 unit bridge, you can place an implant. It's a lot easier.
Right, right. I'm with you on that. Let me go back to this slideshow because I got a couple more questions for you
Okay.
here. Everything that we've talked about, I wanted to present you with the case that I feel on my end can justify subcrestal placement, and I want you to give me the Niznick Paragon reply to this case.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to share here where this is an implant that came across my desk, my office with bone loss. We got about a 10 millimeter probing on the mesial. And as I look at this, I see that the implant looks like it was placed in a decent position, mesial distally between the two teeth. It was placed at the crest. One of my concerns is when I look at cases, I try to say, okay, if something went wrong, what went wrong so I can make sure I don't duplicate it when I go back in here. And one of the things that I see is that being that it's at the crest, the crown seems to mushroom out. Okay. The angle is not the ideal 20 to 40 degree angle that we like to see. And I have a graphic here from a Strauss study that shows the amount of inflammation and where that inflammation is located depending on the angle of emergence of the restoration of an implant, right? And this is an animal study, obviously, because we got histology with it. And so my recommendation from someone that does, in disagreement with the great Gerald Niznick, does go subcrestal when warranted. If this was my position, I probably would have gone a millimeter and a half or so subcrestal, and that would allow for what I feel is more natural emergence profile of the crown, a lot more cleansable because now the patient doesn't have to floss and then dig distally to really get to the implant. I think you mentioned before the tomato on the stick. This isn't quite that, but it is. Uh, to me, I feel it's blurring that line of the implant could be wider or the emergence need to be improved, right? And so I ask you because this would be my resolution, would be slightly subcrestal. And when I asked you about this, and I'll bring up the next slide, and then you can kind of guide us through your thought process. And for anyone that can't see it, it's a Paragon implant with the smooth neck that has been placed about a millimeter supercrestal. And you can tell me how you feel this would solve the problem.
Well, you got open embrasures, so it's easy to clean. You got your connection supercrestal. you're not having to cut away crestal bone to get a flared crown starting a millimeter or two or three below the crest of the ridge. There's no reason ever to go subcrestal, is the bottom line. That's the paradigm shift that I am going to try and create in the field. There's just no justification for it. You can get an open embrasure and with just what I show here. You don't need to sink the crown and start the flare. Create where that comes from is these implants that have one platform, and they got a narrow platform for a wider implant, and they need to sink that implant to create running room for the abutment to flare out to a desirable mesodistal dimension. But when you have two platforms like I do, and you don't have, and even three platforms, because my 5.7, the abutment fits over the sleeve, fits over the outside to get you perfect emergence profile. And I can do that and give up. I can do that because I've got a friction fit connection on the inside. Normally, you want to engage the bevel for your stability. You don't want to sit it on the shoulder, but you can sit it on the shoulder if you have friction fit as your stability. So now you get a perfect emergence profile. A natural emergence profile like you've got on that molar behind the implant is what we should be shooting for in dentistry, not some figment of imagination. I call it the tail wagging the dog.
Right.
You got a small connection for 6 different diameter implants, so you have to countersink it to create running room. Then you need to recontour the crest of the ridge in order to get the contour that you want, or to seat a healing collar, and the implant is dictating the restoration rather than the other way around.
Fair said. Fair play. Okay. So that being said, I did have a question because as much as I like the connect or the friction fit extension, right? There's a couple other companies that do something similar, right? You have your MIS Connect, you have your Nobel N1. What is Paragon doing different or similarly from these other companies that seem to
Big
be doing something
difference.
similar?
Big difference. Here you're buying a Connect, an extension, and now Megagen's added a long collar also. So you got Nobel on one, you got MIS Connect, you got Megagen. You're buying something and attaching it to the implant to get you that extension. And then you're screwing in your restoration to the top of the screw that's holding in the extension.
Right.
So you got 2 screws holding your restoration. We give you a 2 millimeter extender that becomes part of the implant. You can't separate it other than with a tool. We use a 130 pound press to seat 9 of them at the same time. So that's a one-piece implant with the neck up, with the ability to remove it if you want. And the diameter is 4.8, so it's the diameter of a standard multi-unit abutment. So now you want to attach, as it shows here, a prosthetic screw, and they come in different heights. So instead of inventorying abutments in 2, 3, 4, 5, or healing collars in 2, 3, 4, 5 millimeters, you just inventory a $25 screw. We sell 4 for $100. You got a vial of 1 millimeter screws, 2 millimeter screws, 0 height screws, and that's your inventory. And your height adjustment is after you put the implant in and after the extender is in a position you want as you're placing the implant. So big difference, big cost difference as well. I mean, that implant with the extender cost about what the extender costs from the other companies.
Very well said. Well, listen, man. I know that when you messaged me, and we've had some back and forth for some time, especially on LinkedIn. And for anyone that doesn't follow you, even though I don't necessarily agree with every part of what you say, I love following you because you produce the most robust arguments that you document with hyperlinks to research. So it ends up not being just Gerald Niznick's opinion, because he's great and has been in this for a while. Like you make some very good, and I've actually found your website as a very good resource as I'm trying to create story arcs, regarding either if I'm doing a debate or if I'm doing a presentation. You have a very good historical picture that you paint with your arguments. So as we wrap this up, and again, I fully appreciate your time. Someone in your position, when you look at me, and I'm not the youngest guy on the block, I got a couple grays, but I'm that generation and a half, behind you.
I
Where do
have ties older than you.
you probably you probably do. But I look back at my kids, and sometimes I look at my kids' generation, and I say, these kids are soft these days, right? How do you view these up and coming generations, whether it's myself or the new graduates of this time? Are you optimistic about what you see? What feelings are generated when you look at us?
I have got a big job ahead of me if I'm going to convince people not to go subcrestal, to have a smooth neck. But I'm not alone on it. I've got a Boozer and Tarno is for a hybrid design. There's and the science it backs it up. There is no good reason to carry the blasted surface to the top. Yes, it may preserve a quarter millimeter of bone, but yes, it may cause peri-implantitis down the road. So, boom, take that one off.
Right.
There's no good reason to go subcrestal, just none. You go subcrestal, you're going to have to recontour the crest of the ridge to get the abutment, a flared abutment seated. You've assured bone loss below the junction. There's just no good reason for it. But it's hard. I got friends that there's no way I'm going to convince them. Oh, it's working. Especially those full arch guys, the maniacs that are doing 20, 30 arches a month. They want to drop them in quickly without surgical guides, bury them so they don't have to deal with them for a few years, and then relocate after 10 years. Uh, uh, so it's a big job, but I'll tell you what, the job would be easier if I had somebody like you that actually didn't buy into the sound bites from the companies or the opinion leaders like zero bone loss. Okay, so the guy wrote a book,
Right.
zero bone loss. He's going to start adjusting the implant based on the thickness of the tissue. How stupid is that? You can add tissue if you want. There's so many variables that the
Right.
tissue is not something I'm thinking of. Oh, what's the phenotype? Yeah, well, don't no doubt you might lose a little more bone if the tissue is thin, but you don't change what you know is going to work for that. Let it
Right.
happen if it's going to happen, and have a system that can accommodate for it. So you're a test. If you can raise your right hand and say I believe, then I'll go forward with the message. Otherwise, going to my house in Hawaii and I'm not leaving.
Yes, well, that's not the worst consolation prize is to be in Hawaii and hanging out there in your 80s. So we got on this discussion, and apparently I failed the litmus test for for stupidity or passed it, however you want to look at it, right? Because I do use or have been using N1 implants as Nobel's been doing a big
And
push in the
BLX.
Northwest
And
and
BLX.
the BLX. But specifically, you had some very profound criticisms of the N1, and I said we got to run it back. Let's record it. Tell me what you just told me about the N1 extension connection, if
Okay.
you may.
Well, first of all, the N1 has an oval connection, which is much harder to machine precisely and much harder to make the abutment precisely match that. What you want is a lead-in bevel, whereas you're tightening, rotating and tightening the implant, it's seating on the periphery. That's why the abutment of a conical connection is always a half a degree or a degree flatter than the bevel on the implant. So when you metal can only touch in one point and then stops. So you want it to be touching on the periphery. So you have that mismatch of the bevel. You can't do that if you're just dropping an oval into an oval. The oval is, if the idea was that's going to help you with emergence profile, it doesn't, because the emergence profile starts above the implant, not down in the connection. If the idea is that you've got a triangular implant to reduce stress at the crest, that's stupid, because one, you want that crestal contact for stability. If it's too great, use a crestal bone drill, which we sell, which enlarges the hole to the full diameter of the implant. When you run it in rotation, it'll enlarge the hole. When you run it in reverse, it'll plateau the bone. So this is a crestal bone drill. They add an extender onto it, a connector, which you have to buy, held in there by a screw. Then you've got to attach your prosthesis to the top of that screw. So you got two screws going in there to hold that. And they're selling you the extender, and they raised the price, I think, to $580 for the N1 from $555 for the Nobel Active. Well, I'm going to be selling an implant called Tri-Active, which will be surgically and prosthetically compatible with the Nobel Active, except it's going to have triple lead threads. It's going to have bidirectional cutting grooves, a new patent that I've got, 2 grooves going clockwise, 1 going counterclockwise. It's going to have triple lead threads for fast insertion, and it'll be 20% of the price that they charge for their implant. 125 versus, 500 and whatever. So the N1, oh, and the other thing is the drill, the shaper drill that they give you is side cutting. Well, the last thing you want is a side cutting drill when you're trying to make a precise hole. You want a spade drill that goes in one direction and cuts at the end, keeps on tracking. You don't want a drill that you could rotate your hand and enlarge the socket. And you don't know what size drill you want to use until you get in there and feel the density of the bone. They give you a drill. Well, if the bone is soft, you wouldn't want to drill to that size. And they say, oh, you can do it all with one drill. But by the way, we've got another drill you can buy. So they actually do have 2 drills. So that's the thing I like about Nobel is when they ran into trouble with tie unite to the top, they had the good sense to leave the neck anodized smooth for a couple of millimeters. Now, the other one that I criticized, your other choice, is the BLX. BLX. This is a straight implant. If you take a look at it, the first 12 millimeters is straight with a little tapered end. But the inside thread is tapered quite a bit. So the threads get progressively deeper, but it's actually too deep. What you want is you want the internal part of those threads to be compressing bone. As you screw it in, you want the bone to go between the threads and then get compressed, pushed out. Instead, with the BLX, it's so deep that it becomes a reservoir for the bone chips. It's bidirectional cutting grooves, which are they claim are claw-like, and they just chew up the bone. And you and I saw that when Dr. Fromovich presented in Orlando. It throws those chips either out of the socket or into the sluiceways and deep into the implant. So instead of compressed bone next to the implant, you've got bone chips. And that implant is $550. And the bone level one of them, the BLX, and now the BLC carries the blasting all the way to the top, whereas the tissue level one, the TLC and the TLX has a smooth neck. So Boozer is taking the tissue level implant and pushing it down so it's a millimeter above the bone, exactly the way my implant was designed to work.
Gotcha. So question, you mentioned you critiqued the bidirectionality on the BLX, but then you also mentioned the new implant you're coming out with has bidirectional drills, right?
Yeah,
Or threads.
there's a difference. The difference is they've got a sluice way that both sides of that sluice way cut. I have regular cutting grooves with relief ahead of the cutting groove, two of them going clockwise and one of them going counterclockwise. So it is not chewing up the bone, it's just cutting the threads. And it's not throwing the chips, it's not so aggressive that it's throwing the chips out, it's just compressing the bone. And the only time you would need that is if you're screwing the implant in and it doesn't fully seat, take a half turn and back it up and then go forward. It'd be a nice feature to have, but you're not chewing up the threads.
Gotcha. See, folks, this is why when people talk, sometimes you got to listen because you pick up gems. And whether or not I'm at the point where I can raise my hand, right? Like we were joking about earlier. I the osseo shaper side cutting versus an end cutting drill that maintains your the direction of your osteotomy. I didn't think about it that way. And 100% I can absolutely see the danger of having a side cutting drill, especially when, I mean, for better or not, most dentists out here are freehanding most implants, right? So even if you think, okay, I use a pilot drill and I make my starter hole and everything else should just follow along. The truth is, when we're in the mouth and we're leaning like this and the patient's struggling to stay open, sometimes your hand compromises even when you don't realize it. And when you have a side cutting drill, now all of a sudden your angulation went from here to here, right? And sometimes you can compensate for that, sometimes you can't. So I like that. That's a gem that I'm going to definitely absorb.
If you
And
look at implant direct Paragon Implant.com controversy section, I analyzed the shortcomings of 12 different systems, including Implant Direct's new iconic implant, which I call the ironic implant. And where they did there is they hadn't developed anything new since I left the company in 10 years. So they combined my legacy implant with my interactive. The interactive has the Nobel active connection. Legacy has the 45-degree, and they combined it and screwed it up because the emergence profile. In other words, you got a 3.0 a Nobel active connection on a 4.7 implant. So you got an emergence profile like this. And that's hard to clean. And so anyways.
well, let me ask you this before we close it out for a second time, because someone asked me this question and I didn't have quite the prepared answer for. At the end of the day, what are we fighting for if pretty much most of the implant systems can boast a 90+% success rate, right? How do you convince someone to not only buy into your paradigm shift, but invest in your particular system if overall most systems, if done reasonably correct, will have a relatively high success rate?
Very good question. If people believe that all implants work equally well, then the only thing is price. Then why the hell would you spend $550 from Nobel or Straumann when you can buy an Israeli implant for $100? Right. And if I were just to go back and copy the Legacy, which is a very good implant and very high success rate, or copy any of the other ones that are out there, I wouldn't have bothered coming back. It's too difficult a marketing story. And you can't lower the price that much if you're making implants in the United States. compared to making it in Israel. So I really am coming up with what I think are better implants, better solutions. Now, I've been chasing the holy grail of implants for a long time. And to that, I mean a one-piece implant with a multi-unit platform on it. Why bother adding, if you're going to bring the implant into the mouth and attach a bridge right away, why bother buying an abutment? I mean, buying a two-piece implant. So I came up with a number of different implants. One I called the Complete. I took that off the market because it duplicated the Nobel multi-unit abutment, but if the screw were to break, now your implant's screwed because it was going right in top. Then I came up with the Advent, which was pretty darn good, and it's still sold by ZimV. And it was basically a Straumann implant, which you could connect to the top of it. Then with Implant Direct, they came up with the Screw Indirect, which is a very good implant. It has a multi-unit platform top on it, but now you got a fixed height in the tissue. So I had to package that with a 2 millimeter extender. And if you use the extender, then you needed a different color snap transfer to tell the lab what analog to use. So that was all packaged in the Screw Indirect. Very good implant, very good results. Cases, 10-year follow-up cases I've seen are beautiful. But it has the height problem. So now I came up with the Gen 5 Plus, which solves those problems. And what it does is it gives you the implant with a 2 millimeter extender that you could take off if you want to drop back down. And then all your height adjustments are in the neck of the implant, having a neck that's 2.5 millimeters. You can move it up or down. And I'm suggesting you would drill the hole the full depth, screw the implant in 2 millimeters short of where you want it, suture your tissue, and then finally screw it into the level that you want relative to the tissue. But if you need more height, that height can be accomplished with the screw that fits into the top of it, which comes in different heights. So now you're buying a $25 screw, 4 of them for $100, and that's your inventory for an all-on-4 case. You might have 4 of them in the 3 different heights. So you got $300 in inventory to do 3 cases, and you got the height variation on the implant, and you've solved the big problem. You can then have an implant that you don't have to buy an abutment for, and you don't have to keep inventory. Now, the other side of stupid is the Tri implant from Tri Company, I guess the name is, where they have a 2 millimeter neck and they're telling you build on the top of the implant. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
Yeah, try the Matrix. They call it the Matrix implant, and so that means that if the tissue is thick, you're down in a hole, and they're doing and it's not very stable. You're just sitting your abutment on a flat surface. So this is a Rubik's cube, and let me tell you, it's taken me a lifetime to figure it out. So you're getting the benefit. And don't overthink it. Just do whatever I tell you, and you'll be better off.
Spoken like a true authoritarian. I love it. You know, before I let you go though, have you dabbled in zirconia implants? What are your thoughts on zirconia?
Oh, my thoughts are I don't know what problem they solve, but I know what problems they can cause.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm
you
with you
got
on that.
no prosthetic flexibility. You can't put enough torque on there to do immediate load because it might break. And aesthetics with the implants anodized gold or pink, you're not going to get the gray showing through. So that's another reason to use my implants is for the aesthetics. So no, there's no need for zirconia implants. You doesn't have the versatility, can't do multi-unit restorations, you know.
Yeah, but you can't satisfy the hippies that want something that looks natural, right? I mean, that's
Well,
yeah, that might be the only advantage to zirconia is if someone, there's these niche communities of people that are super holistic, and for whatever reason they feel zirconia is the most natural element in
Well,
the
I
whole.
made zirconia abutments for years at Implant Direct. Beautiful abutment. I got one in my mouth now. We made the zirconia. We cemented it onto a gold coping. You could, if the patient is crazy, refer him down the street, you
That's
know, because you'll be living with that patient. I still have nightmares of one patient that I had to throw out of the office. Uh,
right, right.
so you want to avoid crazies.
Well said. Well said. Well, sir, thank you once again. You're a wealth of knowledge. I'm gonna hold you to us hanging out and going out to dinner when I come to one of your courses soon.
Absolutely, my
And
pleasure.
in the
I'll let
meantime,
you buy.
we'll keep disagreeing from time to time on LinkedIn.
I don't
But
think we're disagreeing. You're just getting educated.
there you go. There you go. Listen, man, I appreciate your time. I'm hoping that whoever listens to this finds it educational. You know, whether or not you convinced me 100%, like I said, as I did my deep dive into your versatile system with kind of the adaptableness of your implant, I 100% think that on the clinician side, our decision making has to be adaptable, but also the tools and the materials that we use has to be equally adaptable as well, so we can maximize patient outcomes, right? And at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We want to
Right.
maximize patient outcomes. And that being said, brother, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your years of knowledge and contribution. And I appreciate our arguments because even though we disagree on some things and we go back and forth, I've learned from every disagreement we've had, I've learned something. And I think that's the best way to move forward. Um, are there any closing parting remarks you want to give the audience before we wrap this up?
Learn faster. I'm getting old.
But we got to maximize the time, huh?
Right.
Well, listen, for anyone listening, please give us your website for Paragon so we can make sure that anyone that wants to learn or potentially start using your implant can find you. What's the best way to find you, learn from you, follow you?
Paragon-implant.com. And there's a ton of information. Like you say, I've got 30 links on the rationale for the paradigm shift. I put it all the research together. There's 30 links. Everything I say I can back up. And we're going to be giving training courses around the country. Catch my dinner lecture. It'll be a dinner lecture, 6 to 7 dinner, 7 to 8:30 lecture in 28 cities. Training courses in Las Vegas. And Niznick is coming back. He's back.
Again, this is if this was a movie series, this would be
I'll be
it's
back.
I'll be back for the fifth
Sequel.
time.
Thank you very
Well,
much and good luck to you.
thank you. And for anyone listening, please go to those websites. Always try to learn. Never be sold, be a critic, but do your due diligence and research, and you're always going to learn something. So, that being said, we bid goodbye to everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.